All right. So we are recording here, and I also just wanted to start off by acknowledging that this is a very important day in our country's history. So happy Juneteenth to everyone here today. I wanted to share a resource too that I found. It's from an organization that I do not have any affiliation with, but it's a document that an organization called Webflow put together for their team, and they've made the resources public for everyone. So there's different learning tracks on this document, one about the history of Juneteenth, one about racial injustice in our country, and then tracks about Black Lives Matter and other aspects for our learning. So I hope that in addition to dedicating time today to learning about the K-12 space, everyone will also take some time to learn about Juneteenth and the history of our country. All right, so let's go ahead and get started on our K-12 panel today. I'm going to have our fantastic panel start with some introductions. And Mandy, if you could get us started by just sharing who you are, what your current role is, and then what your background is in the student affairs student affairs higher ed space.
Sure. As Jeannie said, my name is Mandy Balek-Stephens. First off, sorry, happy Juneteenth and happy Pride to those of you that celebrate. I am currently the school director at Golda Meir School for the Schuler Scholar Foundation. We're a college access and completion program. So we do everything from 9th grade support all the way through college and into the first career of our scholars and beyond. And my background is actually in academic advising. So I was in academic advising at the college level for about 15 years, from anything from an advisor, both academic and career counseling advising, all the way to a director of advising at a small private liberal education institution.
Daniel Gray, Senior Director of Road to College and Career, Uplift Education. We're a K-12 public charter school in Dallas, Texas. In my role, I oversee all of our college and career readiness work throughout the whole organization. Similar to Mandy, we do a lot of work with our alumni, as well as having a college and career space as well too. We do a lot of job placement work also. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Melinda McIntire. McIntire is my full last name, but I use Mac so my students don't find me on Facebook. Though I do have a McIntire Facebook too for them. So if you want to find my professional one, it's on there. I'm the Director of Alumni Supports at the Noble Network of Charter Schools in Chicago. We support 17 charter high schools and 1 middle school in Chicago that are public. Specifically in my role, I work with our alumni counselors and basically college persistence for the entire network and for our alumni. My background in student affairs, the first couple years I was in student activities in Greek affairs, doing Greek life, fraternity sorority advising, and campus activities advising, event planning, welcome week, etc. And then spent about 3.5 years in new student programs, so orientation and first year persistence programming.
Great, thank you so much for all of you to be here today. So we're gonna go ahead and just get started. And so you shared what your current titles are, but I'm hoping that you can each expand a little bit more on your roles and specifically what the responsibilities you have are and how the skills you brought with you from student affairs and higher education help you, complete those responsibilities. So Daniel, if it's all right with you, we're going to start here today.
Yeah, sounds good. I realized I forgot to talk about what I did when I was in higher ed. So in higher ed, I started off in commuter services, moved from commuter services into programming, initially in diversity programming, and then to broad scale large event programming. And then from there, I actually moved into alumni relations. I would say, so my role right now, as I said, oversee the Road to College and Career team at Uplift Education. The role really all encompasses everything from from campus culture, which really focuses on college going culture really for all of our high schools. I do a lot of work within our middle schools. So really my role oversees the academic counseling here. So your traditional guidance counselor role that you would have in either a middle school or a high school that would help you schedule classes, talk to you about your grad plan for high school, And then into college counseling, I oversee that team as well too. So that team then works with you very specifically on how you're writing your essay, your college essays, applying for colleges. I have an alumni persistence team, similar to the work that Melinda does. And so that team does the work of really just connecting and making sure that they know exactly where our alums are, reaching out to them whenever they have questions or concerns about things that are going on. One of the things that we've done recently is change our model from being a more passive model of alumni persistence to being a much more active and I think a little more proactive, where we're doing the outreach to them prior to waiting on them to reach out to us. We have a career team that started this past year. That team really does the work of, on the K-12 side, doing the work of exposing students to college or to different careers. So we have a handful of classes. We do the career and technical education classes that are a part of most K-12 schools. We oversee a lot of the content within those classes. And so we do the work of trying to help our students understand what sorts of careers exist, what colleges can get there, and what majors can help you get to those spaces. And then that team also on the backside helps students when they leave high school to find a job at that point, or if they go ahead and head into college, to help them find a job there. In addition to those teams, I also oversee we have a family engagement person as well on my team. One of the things that we saw fairly clearly with the students that we served was that if their parents didn't necessarily believe in the benefits of college, didn't see the why behind college, it was an easy pathway out for them to leave college. And so what we have to do is really try and change the hearts and minds of our parents, help them understand a little bit more of the benefits of college so that they could do the work of connecting, understanding, and learning more about what college meant. So they can then do that work to help their students persist and stay persisting when they're at work. In terms of the things I think that are probably most applicable from my time in higher ed to my time in K-12, I think so much of the politics and the policy navigation, I think is just really important. Understanding the work that comes in and building relationships, connecting with people. One of the things that, obviously as someone who did events for a long time and managed them with students are fairly inconsistent with the way that they do things. Those students that are in college, adults usually are a little more consistent, but what it actually helps you do is helps you develop just the skill set around how you manage people. You're able to understand, someone at their best, someone at their worst, and able to help give them that guidance and that support. I think something else that just helps you is that you get used to just a certain way of thinking. I think working in higher ed, working in events, working in alumni relations, there's a natural strategy that you have to think about the work that you're doing. And I think taking some of that analytical thought is a way to move that into K-12 to help you think through a lot of the different changes and different programming that you're trying to put together to help students out. So yeah, that's I would say that in a nutshell is both my role and the things that I think most easily apply.
Great, thank you so much, Daniel. Melinda, what were the transferable skills that you were able to bring into your role?
Yeah, something that comes to mind as Daniel was talking is engaging alumni and students. In higher ed, for the most part, I mean, not always, there's no, students don't have to do anything for you, right? In student affairs, they don't have to come to events. They do usually have to see an academic advisor, and there's a few other things they have to do, but for the most part, you have to really make sure that you're putting the effort in to engage students. And in K-12, I think that tends to be a struggle for folks. A lot of, I work with our 21 alumni counselors that are all on our different campuses throughout the city. And a lot of them have past teaching experience or college counseling experience, which is awesome. But then I think the translation of okay, but now you have to build those relationships and make sure that alumni want to talk to you after they're in college, because they have no, they don't have to, they have no reason to talk to you. You have no, you're not holding anything over them to make sure that they're engaging with you. And I think that really translates very well into doing post-secondary support work in K through 12. Otherwise, I worked in new student programs. So a lot of information on persistence and, Daniel, I didn't mention this, I don't think, and neither did I, but both of us, and Mandy, you may too, but our organizations are really focused on working with low-income students. So, and mostly students of color. I think we're at about 90% students of color at Noble. So using that knowledge of what, what students are in need of in general, but then applying that to students who are first gen and definitely most, tend to be most vulnerable in pursuing and succeeding in higher education. Having that knowledge and just thinking back to like my orientation days, sitting one-on-one with students and thinking through like all the questions they had, like those are all the questions that every one of my students now has. So I'm trying to think strategically about that from my experience in higher ed.
That's great. Thank you so much, Melinda. Mandy, what about you, your background and what you're using it to do today?
Yeah, so I have a little bit of a different position than both Danielle and Melinda. So I'm actually, the Schuler has many schools that we're in. And so we actually have a full-time, full team of people in high schools around the city of Chicago, the suburbs, and now Milwaukee. And so I'm building a brand new program at Golda Meir, which is the first Schuler school in the state of Wisconsin. So basically what I have brought to that is both my knowledge of working with students, like Melinda said, especially students of color or students from low income backgrounds, first generation students. Most Schuler scholars are in 2 out of those 3 categories. And so since Melinda talked about that, I'm not going to touch on that. But what I've really seen is that starting up a new school and being that school director at a new school, working for a nonprofit organization that then fully integrates into the school, is that relationship building, not only with the families that I'm working with and the scholars, but with the faculty, staff, and administration at the school and at the district level. I think one of the biggest things I learned in higher ed is that there's silos everywhere, and that to be successful in your job and to help students, no matter where they fall in that college or university, you have to break down those silos, and it's the same in K-12. And so being in an external organization, trying to be part of that school community, you have to break down those walls to get in, and for those folks to really know your worth and know how you can help their whole school, but also how they can help the scholars that we're working with, and vice versa. So I think that's what I brought most, is that ability to communicate with people, the ability to create rapport and to keep that rapport, to make sure that we're putting the students first. And anyone in student affairs that I've talked to got into it because they want to put students first. And so K-12, there's no difference there.
Great. Thank you so much. That was really helpful to hear all of those perspectives. I'm curious, obviously, I think in K through 12, maybe as much as any other area, there's so much that is transferable, but I'm really curious within that first year, if you could talk about, and I know some of you are still in your, first year in your roles, but what has it been like, or what was it like? What gaps did exist for you? And where did you have to, fill those gaps, and how did you do it? How did you make up for what you didn't know? So we'll start, Melinda, you're pretty new in your role, so I think that's a good place to start.
Yeah, so I think this is the end of my 7th week at Noble. So first off, I started working during a pandemic, so that's an interesting, interesting approach. So after student affairs, when I left student affairs, one of my very first roles was working for a nonprofit that was in the K through 12 space, and worked actually with Noble. Like Noble, we worked with one of their campuses, so that sort of helped. But that was my first, and that I started that role in 2014, and that was my first time ever, outside of higher ed and having to understand K through 12 landscape, because we were partnering very, very closely, specifically with high schools all around Chicago, all around the city. So definitely just like starting to understand the landscape and what that looks like. I know pretty much every institution in like higher ed institution in the state of Illinois, and could tell you all about them and what's going on. But I had no idea in terms of like what high school to high school, things like in Chicago, there's selective enrollment high schools, and what does that mean and what does that look like, and STEM high schools, and I mean just IB curriculum. I'd never heard of IB. That stands for International Baccalaureate, which is a kind of another option to start earning college credit, to put it very shortly. So things like that, just like learning the lingo and understanding that, and structure too. I think, for example, I've actually talked to a few folks about Noble, because we've been hiring, and like, what is a dean of college? Like, what does that even mean? And like, where does that fit into the larger like structure of K-12? So like, that was the first thing when I started at Noble, was looking just at a larger like flow chart of how we're structured. And we have a CEO, so that's a little different than, you know, like a public K through 12 that has maybe a superintendent or whatever it may be. So I'm trying to figure out like how you fit in that. And then also I would say, you know, I work in a charter school system, and what does that even mean in terms of, it's a public charter school system. So how do charter school systems work with the local public school system, and what does that mean? And so just like doing research on all of those things is kind of where I started.
Awesome, thank you. Mandy, what was your first year like, and what gaps did you have to fill?
So I'm in the middle of my first year, 6 months in, almost exactly. And I think structure is one thing. For me, I think it was just trying to figure out where I fit and where Schuler fit in a new school, because not only was I new, but the program is new. So it's a little bit different, right? And so it's trying to figure out, yes, what your job is and what that actually means to be a part of the Schuler Scholar Program, and what that will mean for the school, but also how to explain that very quickly and completely to people that have never heard of the program before. Because if I was at a new school in Chicago, people know the Schuler Scholar Program. They've seen it, they've heard of other folks in it. But in Milwaukee, it was brand new. So no one had ever heard of it other than the administration that had applied to have us in their school. And so I think just learning on my feet and trying to wrap my head around that, but also trying to find kind of your worth and value in two spaces at once. And what I mean by that is I work for a nonprofit organization, but I don't work at an office with people from that nonprofit all together. I work in a school, and I was the only one on my school team actually for another 12 days. And then I'll have 2 other people, yay. But trying to find how I fit in that and my community, and trying to build relationships with both Schuler and the school at the same time, and trying to see where I fit in that structure, and being the first school in Wisconsin, in a different state, in a different K-12 environment, and trying to learn what Illinois was and how to adapt that to Wisconsin, and just how people see things in K-12 was interesting. So a lot more personal than work, I think, in that answer, but it is something to think about when you're looking at different ways to get involved in K-12. It's not always in the school district for a school district. There's all different people that come into that school district or a certain school. So
Great, thank you. That's a great perspective. And Daniel, you'll have you close us out on this one. What was your learning curve, and how did you fill any knowledge gaps?
Yeah, so I would say for me, I think similar to Melinda, I think just trying to navigate an organization, understanding, I think some of the just the general things that went on, learning a whole new set of acronyms. You know, I had a good understanding of the higher ed ones, didn't know what any of the K-12 ones were, so having to learn that. For me, the team that I inherited here versus the team that I left when I was at University of Houston, which is where I was prior to this, was just significantly larger. So a huge part of it was just navigating, managing a larger team, trying to get out and connect with people in a different way. In higher ed, there's often varying levels, and I'll speak specifically about University of Houston, where I was. Just lots of bureaucracy in terms of just how decisions were made. There was just less of that inside of a charter school. So very often it was like, well, what's the decision? Let's make it so we can go forward. And moving from higher ed, where really you had to get multiple people on your side to understand what you were talking about and have them all be a part of that change process, which is much different. And for me in K-12, I was able to make changes, had to get some people involved, but really for me, it was a question of getting our CEO and our chief academic officer on board. If they agreed, then we could make it happen. So I think getting used to just like that level of expectation, that turnaround on expectation, whereas in higher ed, the process around that can often feel a little bit more extended, just because very often it's a full year worth of work that you're being graded on or judged on, where in K-12, there's a little bit more of a quicker turnaround on just a number of things, especially in high school, that you're being judged on in terms of test scores and some of those other things that are all a part of a role.
Great, so helpful. Thank you so much, all of you. So I want to do a very student affairs, higher ed thing, happies and crappies, highs and lows, rosebuds, rose thorns. What is the best part of your role? And what is the worst part of your role? And I think we're to Mandy to kick us off.
So this one was hard for me to kind of wrap my head around, just because I am new in this role, and within 3 months in this role, I went and worked from home and had to select my first class of scholars from home. So that was hard. So obviously that's a thorn, but that's not a normal thorn, right? So I would say the thorn would be, like I said, trying to find that community when you're working outside of like the normal, like I can walk down the hallway and ask a question to someone that works in the same organization as me. So that's hard, but it's not like horrible, right? We learn how to communicate. We obviously got thrown into this kind of communication a lot lately. But I'm so much of a knock on the door and sit down and have a chat with you. So I had to learn different ways to do that. And when that was appropriate to go down to central office and, work with somebody, and when it was more of a phone call or something like that, which was just very different than being in an academic advising office where all of my advisors were in the same space and we could do a lot of collaborating in person at the same table. The rose of it is the families that I get to work with. I feel like in higher ed, yes, I was the face for the families of the students a lot of times in orientation and advising and registration stuff for first year students. But I didn't get to know the parents. I didn't get to know all of the students because we were serving so many first years, and then only a certain number of those students stuck with our office. So I really enjoy working with parents. I really enjoy educating parents on what their scholars are going to go through. I always love that part of my job in higher ed, and now I get to do more of that. Which is awesome because they are an integral part of their students' experience in K-12, where at higher ed, it's more of the student's onus on everything. And you may speak to a parent once in a while. So that has been great. And, just feeling that camaraderie and feeling that team and family oriented kind of feel within the program is pretty cool. So those were the big ones for me.
That's great, thank you. And I can attest to Mandy's preference for walking into someone's office and chatting that way. Mandy and I actually worked together previously, so she's definitely a person who wants to come on over, and as opposed to putting it by email back and forth, it's just faster and more effective to do that. So great, thanks Mandy. Daniel, what are your highs and lows?
Yeah, my lows are probably similar to what my lows were when I was in higher ed. I was always frustrated by like finance and talent management, and I like to move very quickly with just about anything I do. And so, finance and talent management, they're focused on things that are just very different than I think the folks that are actual practitioners doing the work. And not in a bad way. They're doing it because they need to create safeguards and guardrails that help make certain that what you're doing is compliant and is following whatever laws and policies that you have to follow. But sometimes I think, their priorities very often aren't the same priorities as someone that is as a practitioner in higher ed student affairs or higher ed, or as a practitioner in the college access and success space. They're just looking at different things that are priorities for them. And so they end up being things that just, I think, for me, slow down the ability to do the work as best we possibly can. And for, again, reasons that for them are incredibly valid, but just incredibly frustrating for me. In terms of highs, I would say, I think like one of the things I did love about being in student affairs was like there's just a passion that everyone has for the work, for students. I think one of the things I love about the work that I do in K-12 is that instead of it being limited to one, maybe two different divisions on a campus, really everyone has that same passion and drive to help support students. To the point that Melinda made earlier, we serve on 92%, 94%, population of minority students, a 78% low income, 74.5% first generation college students. So like the students we are helping are students who in the past have been underrepresented in so many ways. And so being able to be in that space, you're working with people who genuinely have a passion for the work, care about the work in a way that I think is just truly impressive and impactful. And so having that kind of energy with the work, I mean, like I said, it means that then when people are upset, they're very upset. But it's nice to have people who truly care about the work every day of the week. And they are truly putting the students first, the students' needs, their family needs first, above and beyond whatever it is that they may need right then at that time. So, so that's what I would say for me is definitely the strongest thing.
Awesome. Yeah. And some of the other panels discussions of like, can you still find meaning in your work? I'm not sure that that's a question that would ever come up in a panel like this. So it's great. Melinda, happies and crappies.
Yes, kind of similar to Daniel. I think it's in this work, and ever since I've left higher ed, I've pretty much been working in the college success space, is that, yeah, it's urgent and I don't know, there's so much work to be done and so much moves to be made. And so I feel like it's actually contributing to a better, larger part of society. Like I always talk about, like, obviously, student engagement on college campus is really important, but after a while I felt like I was ordering ordering pizzas every day and like having pizza parties for freshmen. And I'm like, yes, I know that like eventually does make a difference in student lives, but I just felt like day to day in student affairs, I was like, am I really like impacting? And in Chicago, there's so many larger problems that need to be solved. And so I feel like I am, doing the best, at least I can in our context and in this role to make larger community impact. So I really love that. I think I also feel very much like I have a lot of creative freedom where I know, Daniel, you talked a little bit about this too, but like the bureaucracy of decision-making in higher ed is slow, where I just have to ask, I report to the chief college officer and I just basically have to ask her a question and she's like, sure, go with it, get it done. So that's really nice. And I feel like I'm definitely regarded as an expert. So I'm very much trusted in the work I'm doing, and which is awesome. And I just have to mention, and like, of course, this is not the sole reason I made this choice, but pay is significantly better. I'm just going to throw that out there. So, and just to be honest, the salary level I'm at is way more than I would ever expect to make with 13 years of experience in higher ed. And so, and I think I've posted this in the group a few times, but you can look, where we have similar salaries to Chicago Public Schools, which that's all public information. So if you want to know what people are making in K-12, because of course charter schools are on a similar level because they're competing for talent. So, and our teacher salary schedule is posted on the Noble website. So it's very out there and public. And our alumni success coaches are on the teacher salary. So you can know, for example, it's like, if you have 5 years of experience, this is how much you make. And it's very clear and straightforward. So that's really nice, I must say. And in terms of lows, I would say that you know, in higher ed and student affairs, students are really the central, like college students are the central to you. But in K through 12, working with college students / alumni of your organizations is not the center of what the organization is for, if that makes sense. So a lot of people, you know, both in leadership and just at the ground level at the campuses have no idea like what I do or what the people I work with do, especially our alumni counselors who are in the schools. And I think that just creates some challenges in terms of like, you're not teaching a class, right? You're not like in front of students every day. So what does that mean? And yeah, so trying to, you know, just make sure that we're like being heard. And I think our chief college officer does a really good job of that. And it is so much of a priority to Noble. So that's helpful, but at the same time, that can just be frustrating too.
Great, thank you so much for that information. So if it's all right with everyone, I want to shift gears a little bit now and start talking about your search process and give information for folks who you've sold them on the first half of this discussion. They're ready to go into K-12. So I'm going to give a lot of questions, but don't feel like you have to answer each one of these. Just I want you, whatever, you know, is something you want to speak to. I'm curious about the job search. So how did you narrow your search into this field? Where did you find the jobs that were posted? What did you have to do to your materials to make them suitable for the jobs you were applying for? What was the interview process like, the timeline, all of that? So again, don't feel like you have to answer all of them, but if anything that you want to speak to on that, that'd be great. And we'll start with Daniel.
Yeah, my process is probably a little different than most, just because of how I got into K-12. I had decided to make the switch. You know, I was working on my relations, had looked at various nonprofits, but actually I think really just that my passion was really wanting to be working in the K-12 space, primarily I think in a lot of ways because to Melinda's point, I just wasn't seeing enough people that looked like me, both on campuses as students, and then in leadership roles. And so for me, it was a question of like, what sort of shift can I make in my career to do more to create access and opportunity for students? And so that was really where a lot of that came from. For me, what I did is that I applied, there was a program called the Broad Residency, no longer exists anymore in its current format. So I applied to that program, got into that program. What that program does is that it then connects you with other institutions, so various other charters and districts around the country, and it says this person has this skill set, and they want you to, and so you have to apply to the Broad Residency. They interview you, they take you through the process, you get admitted to that program. From that, then they move you into interviewing with various school districts and government agencies and other charters around the country. So that is how I did that. In terms of my resume, really what I had to do was focus less on like specific tasks. So I didn't want it to read like a job description. Really what I wanted to read was as these are the things that I accomplished in this role. These are the things that I made happen while I was in this role. I talked a lot about just various competencies in terms of work that I was doing. I did a lot of work to, if there was a role that I was looking at applying to specifically with a district, I would look and see what were the competencies that they wanted people to have in that role, and then find something from my past that really aligned to what that was, and then try to use that as an example in the resume process. Same thing for my cover letter. I did something similar where really a lot of what I tried to do was just to align as much as I possibly can, align the work that I did, the skill set that I had with what they were looking for, so that it spoke directly to the actual role in a really unique way. Once I moved through the residency process, was admitted there, interviewed with two groups. So I interviewed with KIP in Houston and then with Uplift. Interviews are very different, but really with both, it was really a question of doing the research prior to, just to understand as much as I could about the organization. To Melinda's point though earlier, and I think Mandy made a similar point, like K-12 is just very different in terms of how it's structured. So the mindset that I had walking in was very different than what they had. And so I think it just so worked out that I think I was able to find someone who was looking for my type of background, who was looking for someone who had worked in alumni, who had worked in student success type roles in that space. And I think it worked out well. But I think really you want to try and focus whatever you do on the skill sets that they're looking for. Most organizations in K-12 are going to have their values, their mission statement, all that stuff's going to be online. And so the more you can pull out information from what they have on there, you know, all of our charters, we have like blogs that we do and all sorts of videos on YouTube, same with districts and same with nonprofits. Like we have all this stuff out there. So take the time to dig into that information a bit to see how they talk about their work. And then that's what I did I use that then to format some of the language that I use, but especially on the resume and the paper documents that I turned into them, I really wanted to align that as much as I could to their language as best I possibly could.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that overview. Melinda, what was your search like? And I know you've gone through a few, but whatever you want to share with us.
Yeah, I think when I first started working in this world, I remember like thinking like, whoa, like blow my mind is that someone told me about Idealist and about NPO.net, which is mostly Chicago jobs on NPO, but they do have some national jobs. And yeah, I was working at Columbia College, which is a private college in Chicago. And we were doing some programming in Chicago public schools actually. And that's kind of how my interest started and thinking through like how I wanted to be in college success and like what that would look like. And so he kind of told me about that and I was like, wow. And so that's where I definitely started. And that's how I found my first role at Genesis Works, which was again in like a nonprofit that was working in with K-12. And then recently I just went through this job process. So I was living in LA and my husband and I moved back to Chicago. And so I was looking kind of all over the place. I knew I wanted to work with underserved students in higher ed. So I was actually like, I had 3 I was interviewing for when I got the Noble role. So I was interviewing also with the National College Access and Success Program for a national job. So that would have been working kind of all over, all in many different cities. This job, which was, was focused only in Chicago, working with, a large majority of students, but only in the city. And then in a higher ed institution, but one that's specifically working, it was in career services. So working with students who, again, are underserved and have some career undermatching. And so figuring out how to place them. And so I think like for me, it was thinking through like, well, what do I really want to do? I actually was lucky enough to get to turn down a few that I just felt like were not a right fit. So I think don't be afraid to do that. If you go somewhere and you're like, this is not going to work for me. And there can be many reasons why that is. But yeah, definitely looking on Idealist and NPO and using Indeed was how I found, I saw Noble. Again, I had worked with them in the past, so really using LinkedIn. I saw the role posted on LinkedIn and just paying attention to that too, I think was helpful.
Great, thank you so much for that. I put those, I'd never heard of NPO, so I had to find it, but I think that that's right. So Mandy, what was your process like? What did you have to do with your materials, all that good stuff?
Yeah, so just to put this out there, I'm totally opposite. I was actually looking for a job at a different institution along the same lines of what I was doing. And I talked to one of my mentors from down in Florida that I've been in a relationship with forever. And she was like, you know what, your values are not lining up with this institution you're at. And that's why you're so frustrated with the current situation that you're in. And you're living in an area that there's not many options, right? So, why don't you kind of branch out? And you used to work in K-12. I was a teacher when I first got out of college. And she's like, you love working with those first year students, those green students, you love working with their parents. Like, why don't you look at K-12? Why don't you look at college access programs or things like that? And I was getting so frustrated in trying to write resume and cover letters for different advising positions that I kind of just threw it away. And one day I was like at wit's end, and I was like trying to write a cover letter after being rejected from a job. And I was like, what am I doing? Like, I don't understand. And my wife was just like, frustrated with me being frustrated at the cover letter, to be brutally honest. And so I like got up from the table, I went upstairs to our bedroom, and I was just like, I'm gonna look up college access programs in this area. And I Googled college access, and the first one that popped up was Schuler, because I live like right on the border, and it's right on the northern border of Illinois, 20 minutes from my house. And I was like, never heard of this before. And I clicked on it, and by 20 minutes later, I'm crying watching the videos of the founder and like why he's doing what he's doing, and like what the organization was all about, how they live out their values. And I was like, I need to apply to this job, any job at this organization. So there were 3 jobs available, and all I needed to do was type in my first name, my last name, my email address, and send a resume. I didn't even look at my resume before attaching it, and I just was like, done. And my wife walked into the room, and I'm like, I just applied for 3 jobs. She's like, what? So I don't recommend that. However, there is a point to this story, is that I got a call within a week from the hiring manager, and she was like, I see that you must be interested in us because you applied for 3 different positions. I want to find out where your skills and talents fit into our organization because I love your resume. And so I was like, okay. So we had a conversation, and she thought because of my experience and what I was able to do at my previous institution, that the school director position would be great because it would be building a new program at a new school in Wisconsin, which they don't know because they're from Illinois. And so she moved me on in the process for that position. I had a Google Meet interview, however you want to say it, a Skype interview with a current school director in the northern region of Chicago suburbs. And it was the most conversive interview I've ever had, if that's a word. It was just a conversation about, what they do, what I have done, and how that translates. And I felt validated for the first time in a long time of my transferable skills that I have been teaching students about, and how they get transferable skills, and they have them for a lifetime, right? And I felt very valued, and my experiences were valued. And within another week, I got a call for an on-site interview with people at the central office. And so it was very different than higher ed, where you go in and you have to give a presentation to a big group of people, and you have to sit at a table with, 5 different people from the search committee. It was all one-on-one interviews, and there were 5 people, and they were all the upper administration of the organization. And it was just them getting to know me and me getting to know them in the organization. I didn't feel like I was bombarded with questions. I didn't feel like they were trying to stump me. And the last interview I had was with my supervisor right now. And she was like, you did a lot of work on your resume to tailor it to this job. And she started reading off bullet points on my resume that, like Daniel said, were my skill sets, were the accomplishments that I had as, a director of advising, as an advisor, as a career counselor. And I looked at her and I was like, I got to be honest. I didn't even look at my resume before sending it in for this job. And she kind of was like, wow, so you actually did all of this? And I'm like, yeah, I actually did all of that. And so it was probably the most validating interview I've ever had. And so it was not the process that normally happens, right? And I think that me putting myself out there in a very different way than having to sit and think about what do these people want to hear and how do I tailor it to what they want instead of just being me. That was what was hard for me in that job search before. And So it really showed the value that they place on people and transferable skills and what you bring to the table. And I truly feel that. So that's exciting. But yeah, in this question, I was like, yeah, I didn't do anything to prove materials. The interview process was the easiest process I've ever gone through. And that's not all like that in this realm of work, but there are organizations out there that really look at those sorts of things and really kind of put their foot where their mouth, you know, like are living out the values that they put out there that you think they do. So it's kind of cool. Very validating process.
Great. You know, Melinda, I think you said you had a little bit more that you wanted to add. So
Sure.
Mandy, before you do that, I wanted to say, Mandy, this is a panel number 7 that we've done. And one thing it's been split. Like some of our panelists had enough of higher ed student affairs and they were ready to go. Others have been happy, but they were just kind of for one reason or another, either a relocation or, you know, for some reason they were looking. But what has been the consistent message is that there has been so much reassurance that they've found themselves in the right place because they have not had to change who they are and because there's been this values alignment. And so I think that that's just a really important message for everyone who's frustrated with a mismatch of values. And I think that in the past few months, some of those value misalignments have become more apparent for some folks. And so I think that this is a really important message for you to know is that you can leave higher ed, and maybe you're at an institution where you haven't found that misalignment, but if you're feeling that, there are places where you can fold in and feel validated as a person without having to make adjustments to who you are. All right, Melinda.
I just had like a few quick tips.
Yeah.
And I've, you know, been hiring and doing some reviews of resumes, so this may help. Please take out any higher ed jargon. Like I know what that is, but most of the people do not. So if you presented at a Kuhoi 3, like 3 years ago, Region 3 or whatever, like I know what that is, but most people are gonna ignore that. Definitely shorten your resumes. I feel like higher ed has 4-page resumes. I shared mine at least, so you're welcome to look at it in the invite. But mine is 2, and I have 13 years of experience. So I would say just shorten them as much as possible. Yeah, as Daniel talked about, like think about your competencies and what you've accomplished rather than like exactly every single thing that you did. Let's see. Oh, and also just know that higher ed is a very, very slow hiring process, as you all probably know, but the rest of the world does not work like that. So I've definitely had people like reach out to me like, oh, you posted that role. And it's like, that role was filled like 3 months ago, you know? So like, it does move a lot faster. Where in higher ed, you know, like literally it'll sit there for 6 months before they even start reviewing resumes. And so if you see a role you're interested in, I would encourage you to apply like within a few days, like very fast, because usually, especially like in you know, in my experience working in this world where like, for example, we're filling a Dreamer supports manager role, like we needed that person, like the person who's leaving her last day is on Friday, and like we need that person to start ASAP. So it's going to be as fast as possible, unlike higher ed, which has 5 different rounds with 400 people and committees and presentations. And my interview with Noble, I had a 30-minute with my current supervisor. And then the second round was, this was all of course pandemic time, but I had a panel interview with the leadership in my department and then a panel interview with the people I would be supervising. So all in all, 2.5 hours within 2 weeks. So it does move a lot faster. So just to be conscious of that, I want to throw that out there.
Great, wonderful tips. So I was just gonna say, I wanted to make sure that folks knew that they could be asking questions. So we did have a question come in right now. So I'll just give it to each of you. How long did your search take? And I don't think that they're talking about like from when you submitted your application to when you accepted it, more about like how long did you give yourself to look at roles and things like that. Daniel, you unmuted yourself and I lost my place and where we were going. So we'll let you start.
No problem. So for this role that I'm in right now, I probably probably had given myself about a 6-month window. So because I was part of a separate program, the Broad program, and then applying to Uplift from there, that ended up extending the process a bit. The Broad process was about a 3 to 4 month process. Once I actually like found Uplift and applied there, it was, I don't know, probably 2.5 weeks. And most of that was me, just trying to like navigate time on my own schedule. Right now I have a couple roles that I'm being recruited for. So, I mean, these are also the same thing. They're essentially waiting on my schedule. And I think like that's one of those things to Melinda and Mandy's point. In K-12, there's just a willingness to move things along a whole lot quicker. Once they're in the process and ready to hire someone, whatever that may look like for them, they will jump to that process pretty fast. So yeah, I would say to Melinda's point, if you're going to apply for a role in K-12, look for it, look to see when it was released. If it's more than a week and a half that it's been out, likely you're probably in the 200-300s in terms of number of applicant that you are. So you probably won't be seen at that point in time. The closer you can get to the release date of that application actually being out, the better you'll be off.
Thank you. Mandy, what was your timeline for search?
I didn't really have a timeline, right? But I would say just in Schuler in general, because I am going through hiring, I'm hiring staff right now. Do research on where you want to go so that when something comes up, like Daniel said, you jump on it. Because we do rolling interviews. So like if you put in a resume tomorrow, we may interview you the next day. And if you're a good candidate, we'll move you forward. And if we're still looking, it's still out there. And so, the quicker you get your name in and the quicker that we know that you're interested, the better. I also want to say that we've had a few people apply for positions that we didn't think that was a good fit, but we want to keep you in a pool for a different position, which doesn't really happen in higher ed very often. So especially in a nonprofit organization that works in, K-12, I have told 2 people already that I will be hiring within the next X amount of months. I would love to see your name in this pool, and we have to have them re-put in their resume, but they don't really need to do anything with that other than put in their name, email address, and resume, where other processes are different. But know that also is because in higher ed, I felt like they didn't really look at where you would best fit. If you're not a fit, then they're just done with you. Where I feel like organizations that I've talked to, like Schuler, we'll keep your name and we will contact you, or we will send you that job posting once it's out there. And we actually want you to reapply. And we want to see you in that different bucket. So do your research on the organizations or the school districts or whatever area you want to go into in K-12, and be watching for those jobs to come up.
Great, thank you. Melinda, did you want to speak at all about the timeline that you had?
Sure, I'll just throw out there. So I, as I mentioned, I left my last role in October and I started it at the end of April. So I had, started applying, but I would say like from posting until like offers was usually about 2 months, like time, and because there was some that I went through that I did not get the role, but I knew like within 2 months, like from the day I applied to the day I got the offer. So I would say that's pretty average for at least nonprofits and K-12.
Awesome, thank you. So there's another question that has come in here. If you looked at other industries in addition to K-12, I think actually, Melinda, you were my first one next. So if you want to start with that one.
Yeah, as I mentioned, my background, I had been working in the nonprofit space that was working alongside K-12. So I assumed honestly that that's kind of where I would be next. I was interviewing, for a couple different roles, but this one just kind of fell into place first. And honestly, back to the pay option, it was the highest paid. I also had a lot of my last 2 roles ago, I was in for 4.5 years. The organization was called Genesis Works, and they did a lot of workforce development. So I was looking in workforce development too, and did some interviews with that as well, but also nonprofits. So it just kind of worked out with K-12 that, you know, this role was open. I wasn't only looking in K-12. I was, and I was moving back with no job. So I was hardcore searching. I needed a job very quickly, as fast as I could. So, and this one just kind of worked out.
Okay. Mandy, I know you said that at the encouragement of a mentor, you decided to go to K-12. Was there any other industries that you were looking at besides K-12?
Yes. So event planning, I was looking at that and higher ed. And I think because of the work that I did as the director of advising, I felt confident in my event planning skills and in working with that industry. And so I had looked at a few. I had gotten calls back after I actually took the Schuler position of companies that did value what I had to put forward. And I also was applying for some consulting firms along the lines of diversity and inclusion, because I have been a consultant for both higher ed and K-12 on safe space training for LGBT needs in schools. And so I was also looking at broadening that background into more different ways of looking at diversity training and inclusion. So I had been looking at that, but this job kind of brought that into a job in education because we do work with underrepresented populations. And so I felt like that was a good fit also.
Thanks, Mandy. Daniel, in your search, I know you said you were looking for spaces that had representation. Were you looking outside of K-12?
Yeah, I mean, I had tied myself down to either nonprofit or K-12. That's really where I was pretty focused on. Yeah, I think I had put myself in a place where I really did want to do values-based work, and that was really important to me. And so, yeah, I kind of limited myself just to those two spaces only, really.
Awesome, thank you.
I'll throw in there, my last role was in grant making and philanthropy, but specifically in post-secondary. So I applied and actually ended up withdrawing from a process with another grant maker here in Chicago, and just felt like it wasn't the right fit to do it again. So if anyone on offline wants to talk about grant making and being a program officer, that's a whole longer conversation. But yeah, that was my last role too. So.
Right. A question that just came in was what one I was going to ask next. So if you could speak a little bit about like the work-life balance, what does it look like? Are you 8 to 5, 9 to 5, or are you all over the place? So Mandy, let's start with you first on that one.
Yeah, so I went from working 80 hours a week at my higher ed advising job to 40 hours a week. And I don't know what to do with my personal time, which is a great problem to have. So with Schuler, since we are fully integrated into the school and we work full-time in the school, we work during school hours. So basically, the school day starts at 7:25 in the morning at our school and ends at 2:30. So we're there during that time. However, we do have, each class has, I only have one class coming in. So, but each class will have one after school activity each night of the week. So my staff will have to cover that. And so we'll do some flexing. And we do exposures or college visits and things like that on the weekends once in a while, but it's all flex. So, you know, I've been told multiple times because people knew where I came from that, you know, please take your time, please flex your hours. Your personal time is valuable. You need that to recharge. Very different than what I've been told in my past and very out there in my organization, which is awesome. And so, yeah, we work a normal day schedule and then have some nights during selection and things where we're, you know, recruiting students and their families. Obviously, families can't make it during the day all the time, so we do have night events during certain times of year, but very flexible in that, and way less time overall than I spent at my previous job.
Great. Daniel, how about for you? What's the work-life balance look like?
Yeah, it was similar. So prior role, I was probably doing 60, 70, and in a busy week, maybe even up to 80 hours a week. Now, an average day is 9 to 5. My role is a little weird. And probably like most student affairs, I spend most of my work day just, in meetings. And so I will every once in a while, just because it's the nature of my role, I'll sometimes have to do some work a little bit later on, but that's generally flexed based on my own needs, my own, like if I want to, depending on how far ahead I want to get. I think in terms of events, we have board meetings every month. So every month I've got to go to a board meeting. There are lots of months when that's the only time I work past, even 5:30. And those end at 6 on the dot, no matter what. And so every once in a while, I'll have to stay for that. And we do 1 or 2 night events usually a month. But even those, like a lot of times if they're on a high school campus and I'm not asked to come, or if I don't need to come and speak, I'll pop in maybe to stop by and say hi. I'll usually get there, if it starts at 5 or 6, I'll get there, 4:30, say hi to everyone, say hi to the families and parents that are there. Leave it maybe like 5:30 and then be home by 6 or so. But yeah, I think being in K-12, because of one, you're working with minors, so in general, like there's just restrictions to what you can even do. And 2, because the school day is, a 7:30 to 3:30 or an 8 to 4, whatever that may be for your school. Like you're very often limited just to what their own availability is. And so it makes the work a little bit easier in terms of times.
Great, thank you. Melinda, what's your schedule like?
Yeah, very much so far 9 to 5 as well. I'll just throw in there that with alumni and post-secondary work, once the pandemic, if it ends, we will I'll travel now and again just to different college campuses to meet with. Our alumni counselors do a lot more traveling in terms of going to different campuses, mostly throughout the Midwest, just for a day or 2. So that is kind of, the times where, you may have to stay overnight in Champaign-Urbana or Michigan, University of Michigan or whatever. But overall, yeah, that's what the people I work with and supervise, I expect 9 to 5, but that's about it.
Thanks. Okay, so there's a question about specific skills, certifications, or experiences that you would recommend folks have to become more competitive applicants. Daniel, do you want to start us off on that one?
Yeah, I think if you've got a teaching background, I think getting a certification obviously is great. It's super helpful. The nice thing about having a teaching certification is that it just allows you lots of flexibility. If that train has passed, one of the nice things about charters is that charters, they don't require you to have some of those same skills, some of those same licenses. So you're able to hop in with whatever job you may have. If you've got a master's degree, very often at a K-12, you actually have more education. In higher ed, if you have a master's degree, very often you have some of the least amount of education among most of the staff that work there. In K-12, very often you have some of the most education. And so there's very little in terms of necessary licensure that you have to have. In terms of volunteer work that you can do, I think any type of volunteer work you can do around, if you want to, and again, it would depend on what you want to do. So if you want to work in college access, I would say volunteer with a college access organization. Like if you were someone that wanted to come and work for Uplift and wanted to work as one of our college counselors, volunteering, we actually have one of our strongest college counselors, someone who started volunteering on campus just because she wanted to be a part of the work that we were doing. Over time, realized that she really had a passion for this work versus what she was doing, left what she was doing, came in as a teacher part-time, became a full-time teacher. And then 1.5 years after she started, she became a college counselor. So like, if that is something that you want to do, the more you can find those types of organizations, they're various nonprofits similar. If you can find something like Schuler or like Noble, like those things help you get connected. You meet the right people. I think getting into those organizations, there's, in every city, if you have a college, you'd likely have some sort of college access organization that's helping students get into that college. I would just maybe do some work, reach out to the admissions office and find what sorts of partnerships does your school have to help you then go and find those different organizations like that. And then just spend time there. You know, very often if you do that time, that spending the time there, they may see you as a really strong volunteer and want to actually bring you on board. But like I said, the more you can be present, the more you can be there, the more you can gain those experiences, the better.
Thank you. Melinda, anything to add?
Yeah, for us, I would say, you know, we want to know any experiences you've had working with underserved students in higher education, because that's the population we are working with. So if you have done any specific like targeted work with, you know, low income students of color, first gen students, I definitely want to know that you have some knowledge or experience or values aligned with that work. So I would say that.
Thanks. Mandy, how about you? Anything to add there?
I was going to say exactly the same things. The only thing that I would add is, depending on the organization, there are so many different roles. So yes, I'm a school director, but there are people all over the place in Schuler doing all different things. And so you can really find areas where your current skill set, your current experiences and certifications are going to fit the roles there. So it just depends on what area you want to work in. If you want to work directly with students, do you want to work with alumni? Do you want to work with careers services? Do you want to work in HR? Do you want to totally change it, but work in the education system or for a nonprofit and work in, you know, something like marketing or communication, HR, training and development. There are so many skills that we have as people that have worked in higher ed that you don't even think about because it's just part of who you are and what you do on a daily basis. So start thinking about those things and what actually brings you joy and what brings you those feelings of like accomplishment, and then see what they have to offer at these organizations, because there's a place for you if you want there to be a place for you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. All right. So we are just about ready to wrap up. I just wanted to see if there was anything our panelists wanted to add. I think we've gotten through all of the questions in the chat. Anything that we didn't get to yet, Melinda, Mandy, or Daniel, that you'd like to add? All right. Oh, I see a few mics unmuting.
No, not anything specific. Just like I'm happy to answer any more questions. Especially, I know Noble is hiring a lot right now. So if you're based in Chicago, unfortunately, they're not remote roles, but and we're going to have a few more roles posted. So check them out, and if you have questions, let me know, and I'm happy to help you think through like what may be a good fit.
Great, thank you.
I would say the same thing. Schuler is hiring like crazy. We have a lot of new initiatives around diversity and equity and inclusion in schools, both in higher ed and in K-12, that are coming out. And we're brand new in Milwaukee, and we're looking to expand in Milwaukee. So if you're in the Milwaukee area or want to be in Wisconsin, or are in the Chicagoland area, we have a lot of opportunities also. And I'm willing to connect and chat with you about any of your questions about the nonprofit college access completion kind of roles that you have.
Thanks, Mandy. All right.
Yeah, and I'll just say we're also hiring. So if you're in Dallas or in Texas, or if you want to move to Dallas, Texas, know, like, so there's lots of great work happening. I think one of the things that's super exciting about Dallas is that the city as a whole is it's a massive city, so whatever you want, you can find there. But even in addition to that, like I said, we're doing some really good work around just in general helping students access college. I think in terms of the work, the thing that I'm most excited about is, you know, if your values align to wanting to work in K-12, there's tons of jobs out there. You know, unlike higher ed, where there are lots of other people who are looking for that same job that you're looking for that have probably pretty similar background. You know, they were student leader in college, they did some work, they've done some early professional work working in higher education, they have a master's degree. In K-12, it's just a different experience. Like I said, there are, I mean, just in Dallas alone, there's 17, 18 different districts with all that have roles like the ones that I have. So your opportunities of finding just lots of different jobs where you can do lots of different things, or just exist in a different sort of space. And I think it's something that I think is really exciting. And being able to work with families and students and help them see themselves as being as owning and deserving of a lot more opportunities is something that I think you get to see in K-12 that is a little more difficult to see in higher ed. And it's something that again, for me, has been probably the best part of my job, just seeing families recognize that their student can go to, a university, their student can go to school for free, their student has done the work, and it's super exciting to be a part of those families' journeys.
Awesome. Great. You all, thank you so much for a fantastic panel. I learned so much. I know all of our attendees must have as well. I realized I forgot to mention, on the screen right now, there is a link there. It's a bit.ly link, so it is case sensitive. So if you use the exact way it's written, you'll go to a folder that has a Google Doc for each of our panels, and there you'll find the contact information for all of our panelists, and they've all been so kind to be willing to share their contact information, some resources sometimes, and their LinkedIn profiles so that you can connect with them and learn more about their backgrounds and also all of the jobs that they're going to be hiring for. So Melinda, Mandy, Daniel, thank you so much. Y'all have a wonderful evening and weekend, and take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Take care, everyone.
Bye, everybody.